Welcome to History B. Today we're going to talk about continuity and change and where it fits in the essay. So we will go back to the essay structure. The essay consists of an introduction, historical context, definition of the issue, which is interaction of groups, 3 paragraphs about change, 2 paragraphs about continuity, and a conclusion. Today we will be talking about the 3 paragraphs about change and the 1 or 2 paragraphs about continuity. Because it's a short in-class essay, it's okay if you only do 1 paragraph about continuity. That would be fine. Let's start with a definition of change. Change basically refers to a significant difference before and after an event. The difference can be social, economic, political, or cultural. So basically the idea is you look for 3 events to talk about change. You focus on one aspect of the change, whether it's social, political, economic, or cultural. What was the situation like before the event? What was different after the event? What were the causes of the change? And you write a paragraph about each event, answering these questions basically. So I have an example here about the civil rights movement. So if I was writing my essay about the civil rights movement between 1955 and 1968, I would talk about the interaction between the civil rights movement and the government, and it could be local government, so I would probably say the civil rights movement and government institutions would be my 2 groups. And then I would look at 3 events during the civil rights movement of that period to examine how they caused change. So I'm going to give an example of that. Some of the events I could look at would be the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. I could look at the assassination of Martin Luther King, and I could also look at the Rosa Parks bus boycott, the bus boycott that was instigated by Rosa Parks. And I would do a paragraph on each one of these events, talking about the interaction of the civil rights movement with the government institution involved and how that interaction changed the position of either of the groups or of the society. So let's look at the Rosa Parks bus boycott as an example paragraph for our essay. So this video gives you a bit of background about what happened with Rosa Parks. Basically, she was an African-American seamstress, a woman living in Alabama. And in Alabama in 1955, there was segregation on the buses. And the African-American people had to sit at the back. The white people sat at the front. And if there were no seats on the bus, the African-American people had to stand up and give their seat to a white person. Rosa, one night coming home from work, decided that she would not give up her seat. So she was arrested and she was fined. She was taken to court and she was fined. And after that incident, there was a year-long boycott of the buses in Alabama. Okay, so the event we're looking at is Rosa Parks and the Alabama bus boycott. The eventual change due to this event, so the interaction would be between Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement and the local Alabama government, right? Eventually the change was that the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was illegal, so bus segregation was changed. And that would be the change that you would talk about in your paragraph. So here is an example of how you write the paragraph. Basically, you describe the event first. In 1955, Rosa Parks, an African-American woman from Alabama, refused to give up her seat for a white person on a segregated bus. She was arrested by the authorities. This event led to a clash between civil rights protesters and the local government. The protesters boycotted the Alabama bus service for almost a year. As African Americans were almost 75% of the passengers on the service, this significantly affected government revenues. That's the interaction of the groups. Eventually, in 1956, the Supreme Court of Alabama ruled that segregation on buses was unconstitutional and illegal. That's a change. This led to African Americans being legally permitted to use the front door of buses and not being required to give up their seats to white passengers. That's also the change. However, these legal changes did not translate immediately to practical changes. That is a bit of continuity, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Okay, so basically you write about Rosa. That paragraph about Rosa is one of 3 paragraphs about events that lead to change. And then you have to talk about continuity. So to define continuity, it means sometimes aspects of society, culture, the economy, or politics can remain the same over a long period of time. So you're looking at what doesn't change, basically. When you write about continuity in your essay, you can discuss it in the context of each event. So you could say, use that change paragraph about Rosa Parks and add a bit of continuity down the bottom, or you can write it as separate paragraphs towards the end of the essay. And I'm going to give you an example of both ways to write it. So this is a way you can write the paragraph after the change paragraphs, right? So it's as a separate paragraph to talk about continuity. Despite events such as the March on Washington and the Alabama bus boycott and the subsequent legal verdicts, little changed for African Americans in the United States after the Civil Rights Movement. For example, many African Americans were still discriminated against in terms of job opportunities, access to legal equality, and racist violence. And you could give examples of that. The recent death of Ahmaud Arbery, an African American man who was shot by police while jogging, suggests that racism is still a significant part of American institutions. I would probably put that statement in the conclusion. If I was writing about continuity and I'd already defined the historical period I was talking about, I would probably only talk about up to 1968 in this case, and I would give examples between 1955 and 1968. Examples of violence against African Americans, examples of legal inequality, social inequality, things like that. Okay, you can also include continuity within the paragraph about change, and what I have here is the same paragraph I wrote about Rosa Parks. However, I've just added a bit down the bottom. However, these legal changes did not translate immediately to practical changes. For example, many African Americans who attempted to defy segregation on buses were abused physically and verbally by white passengers, suggesting that underlying racism did not change in Alabama. So I've added the continuity to the change paragraph, but I think it might be easier just to do the continuity as separate paragraphs because it makes it clearer that you're meeting the criteria of the assessment. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can email me. What you have to do, start doing now, is thinking about your historical period and the events that you're going to talk about and the groups you're going to talk about. So it's very important that you now start thinking concretely about what you're going to write your essay about. If you have any questions about that, you can just get on to me. Okay, thank you.